Our next guest believes in his organization's simple mission statement to create a world in which men and women live as equitable partners and work together to secure better lives for their future. That's, of course, easier said than done. But Anthony Keedi is optimistic. He works at the Abad Resource Center for Gender Equality in Beirut, Lebanon. He's a gender specialist with a master's degree in psychology from the American University of Beirut. Keedi started on this path after questioning his own definition of masculinity and what he calls the overbearing, dominant, abusive stereotype of the alpha male. He's reconciled his own feelings and behavior, but he's still battling stereotypes and cultural traditions that many men embrace around the world. That's certainly the case in the Middle East, where Abad's efforts are focused. The irony of his work is not lost on Anthony Keedi. He describes himself as a man fighting for women's rights in the Middle East. He says that if anyone has any questions, he's ready. And Anthony, I do have questions. I want to get to those in just a second, but first I want to welcome you to Full Frame.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anthony, you describe yourself as a reformed macho man. What does that mean exactly?
The word macho man is actually quite general. What I would mean by that is typically the way that men are socialized all around the world, although it differs from culture to culture and subcultures. And of course, we can't speak in complete generalities because every individual has a different case. But for the most part, men are often taught dominance is very important. They are taught that they are not allowed to display too much emotion, especially emotions of vulnerability, love, fear, that they are expected to have the answers, they are expected to be tough, and along with that comes privileges of being the head of the household or having your opinions taken into real consideration versus having it be drowned out in the background noise of other people's opinions. You are a man, you should be a leader. We're often taught to have a high threshold for pain. We're often taught to act very violently in order to establish our physical presence. And all of those things together, I guess, would be considered that traditional macho man stereotype. And I think when someone deviates from that, when someone begins to realize that that is a very inhumane character to try to be, and it comes at an extreme cost to your mental health and to your interpersonal relationships with the people who are around you and people who are very, very important to you, such as spouses, partners, children, friends. And there's a lot to be said for aborting the typical traditional concept of what a man should be in light of a more humanistic approach to what a man could be as a human being.
So you're a reformed macho man, but now you're also a reformed macho man reformer, I would say. How tough is it doing what you do, especially in the Middle East, would you say? I mean, how much is this ingrained in the culture there, and what drives that?
Oh, wow. They're really difficult questions. I think it obviously is very difficult working in this way in the Middle East. But I would not necessarily say that there are cultural factors that make it difficult to work in the Middle East, as much as I would say that the present state of the Middle East, in terms of the turmoil and the conflict that exists, is the #1 detriment to where we can get to in establishing gender equality and ridding ourselves of gender discrimination. Often, conflict is the antithesis of peace, obviously, and equality cannot exist without peace, without that harmony, without listening to everyone's opinion and having everyone have a voice. The core essence of democracy that isn't necessarily perfect anywhere in the world, but specifically here with so much conflict, with so much war, people tend to regress back to what feels comfortable or what they've known all along. And these gender roles are so traditional and centuries long that often people will fall into a role that they are aware of in a time of fear, rather than attempting that progress, or even if the people want that, the government or the factions that be who have the power in that conflict will stop any attempts to make that progress. And anything that has been done anywhere in the world can be done here. But right now, it's just so, there's so much turmoil in the Middle East that it's becoming very difficult to get a foothold in the side of the cliff that we're trying to climb when it comes to gender and development.
So you're climbing this cliff. Talk to me about, you've already kind of described some of the difficulties. Can you describe for me some of the successes you've seen along the way?
Oh, with pleasure. There are a lot of successes. We have, 2 years ago, we began a campaign working with religious leaders that exist in our community. And Lebanon is a society that is very divided based on sectarianism and confessionalism. The civil war that existed in Lebanon was roughly and quite drawn on these sectarian and confessional lines. So I believe at last recorded there were around 18 sects in Lebanon of different religions. And we were able to get the 4 highest religious leaders of the 4 most major sects in Lebanon to come out with a statement that's saying that violence against women is a sin. This was one initiative that we did in order to try to understand that religious leaders here, we will not agree on everything when it comes to gender. There will be several points that we disagree on. But this was really the first time in Lebanon on such a large scale, and the first time in the Middle East on such a large scale, that civil society was able to work with such high-standing religious leaders and have them come out and make a very public statement about violence against women being a sin. And the level of influence that these men have over the general population is astounding. So that's only one example. We also have several programs where we work with youth to try to help them challenge the traditional concepts of masculinity and femininities and what a woman should be or what a man should be before those identities are really solidified. So it's a very good form of primary prevention before the problem begins to stop it. We also have a private clinic where we give psychological counseling to men residing in Lebanon, free of cost, anonymous and confidential. And we try to show the gentlemen that come into our center, the men's center, how the different difficulties that they're facing in life are being compounded by their communication skills or by their behaviors and attitudes based on what they believe a man should be based on these traditional gender roles. And that, again, when they step away from those and they start challenging the logic of those gender roles and how much better they can be on a personal level when they do that they can really start stepping away from that, and they can see that the problems in their life slowly can start to go away when they make that step.
When I was in Beirut, one of the women that I worked with was very troubled. You brought up the Civil War. She lived through that there, and she was very troubled by what was going on in Syria. And of course, we've seen the spillover, all the refugees landing in Lebanon. I know that you're working with some of that community. What are some of the unique challenges you're dealing with there?
It is probably the most challenging community that you could hope to work with when you're doing any type of civil society work. And the reason for that, if you come down to it, a lot of the men or women that we'll be speaking to from refugee communities are dealing with not having their basic human rights being met. There's a lot of racism and a lot of abuse from the Lebanese population. They no longer have homes. Their basic needs of food, water, shelter, and security are nowhere near being met. They're living in far below par conditions for that anyone would put as a benchmark for what is the minimum a human should have. And more refugees are coming in every day. There's still so much unprocessed trauma from the atrocities that they've seen in their home countries and new traumas that they're having here. And then someone comes and talks to them about gender equality or their relationships with their wives or other people in their family. The challenge is at first it doesn't seem like a priority to them because they have so many things that they need to worry about and so many problems that they don't necessarily prioritize women's rights or gender equality. Essentially, regardless of the situation we find ourselves in our setting or our environment, it's always going to be better when you have the resiliency of the people around you who love you. And that's one of the core messages of gender equality, that when you treat people with respect and nonviolence, when you take fear and dominance out of the picture, you can just work through conflicts in a harmonious fashion, and there's a much greater connection. And simple proverbs that we know from a long time, 2 heads are better than 1, they start taking effect. So the challenge is getting them to look past all of these issues that they're faced with currently, and to be patient with them while we try to get that message across.
Anthony, I've heard the word patience from you quite a bit, and I want to just get one final question in. What's it like? In many respects, you must feel like you're a voice in the wind. You're thinking outside the box compared to so many other men that you bump into on a daily basis. How difficult is that, and what keeps you going?
It's difficult, but it's expected. And again, you're literally asking people to challenge what they thought has been right their entire lives. The thing that keeps you going is the fact that personally you know how liberating that can be. Personally, you know that as difficult as it is to live your life like that, especially in a society that doesn't necessarily reinforce that type of a perspective, that when it comes down to it, you are so much prouder of yourself, and you are enjoying your interpersonal relationship so much more by doing things that you never thought you should do in order to have that joy in your life, by being vulnerable, by really sitting back and letting someone else take the lead every once in a while. And it's a beautiful feeling. And helping people reach that step, however long it takes, it's completely fulfilling, and it's definitely worth the wait.
Anthony Keedi, thanks so much for joining us from Beirut, Lebanon. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Coming up next, a full-frame close-up that is very close to the hearts of everyone who works on this broadcast. You don't want to miss it.